Just last week, we signed a new defense pact with Lithuania to increase our rotational troop presence there. So the prevailing narrative holds that these are the next targets that we need to defend. My thesis is that this is incorrect, and if we do not correct our thesis, if we do not correct our strategic thinking, we're in for a world of hurt when Russia goes for what it's really looking for, which is this piece of territory, which is not a former Soviet Union area. That is the Turkish Straits, which holds the city of Constantinople. As you will notice, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea are only connected by those tiny, tiny narrow waterways, which means it's an incredibly important geographic location. Now, the point of departure for my research, because I'm concluding that the rest of America's war colleges is incorrect, naturally should have a little bit of foundation for it. So the point of departure for my research is evaluating what's wrong with Russia right now. What do they have to do just to ensure their own survival? The first crisis that Russia is dealing with is a geographic crisis. Russia is simply too big for its own good. Most of its ports are frozen for the entire year, or most of the year, meaning that precludes a lot of international trade, and they can't extend their naval power. So what Russia is looking for is territorial expansion towards warmer waters. That's what they need to survive. Additionally, there's the economic crisis. The problem is that when other countries put sanctions on Russia, Russia has to just sit there and take it. They don't have a lot of leverage over other countries' economies. So what they're looking for is to control their own trade and get leverage over other countries' trade. So Constantinople fits into both of these categories as a primary target. Additionally, there's the demographic crisis. This is one of the most severe. According to Russia's own internal statistics, Russia is in danger of losing 20% of its population by 2050. And the root of this crisis is the fact that so many of their young women have used abortion as a form of birth control that they can no longer carry pregnancies to term. And additionally, so many of their young men, out of work because of the economic crisis, have resorted to drugs and alcohol, and there's declining male mortality rates in Russia. A lot of them are dying off. So at the root of this, Russians are just making poor decisions. What Russia needs is restored social morality to address the root cause of why their population is dying off. I will argue that Constantinople fulfills that as well. But let's get into the next point, which is Russia's Byzantine roots. When you look at Russian historians, where do they believe that they are placed in history? What is their role? When you look at Russian historians, they believe very fervently that they are the direct heirs of the old Byzantine Empire. Just for context, the old Byzantine Empire was the eastern half of Rome that was intentionally and demonstrably Christian, and their purpose for their existence was to defend Christendom. Russia believes that when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, that mantle of Christian responsibility was passed by God to them. This has painted all of Russian history, except for the time of the Soviet Union. This is why the Byzantine military flag and the Russian military flag, which is this imagery was put back on after the Soviet Union, indicates that they are returning to their Byzantine roots. So the question is, does Vladimir Putin believe in this inherited holy mission? And this is where we get into my work on Vladimir Putin's favorite scholars. These are the individuals that he incessantly cites. He forces his governors to read them, and he erects statues to these men. The first one is Pyotr Stolypin. Pyotr Stolypin was essentially, in a nutshell, a czarist hatchet man for the last monarch of Russia. In the 1910s, he was running around killing and executing so many communists that they started calling the hangman's noose Stolypin's necktie. And so if Vladimir Putin admires this man, it's an indication that he probably does not like communists that much. Now, the next individual is Nikolai Berdyaev. Nikolai Berdyaev was a Russian ethicist and philosopher, and his whole perspective was he lived during the time of World War I. He watched the world rip itself asunder. And so what he thought is, it's humanistic philosophy, it's godlessness that has led to this mass slaughter. And what's required to heal the world is a new Russian empire, a world under Russian unity with new Orthodox Christian values. So he envisioned what the empire should look like. And by the way, he explicitly said a Russian Constantinople is critical to fulfilling that mission. Then we get to Ivan Ilyin. Ivan Ilyin is an individual who was also a religious philosopher, banished from the Soviet Union. And his contribution to Vladimir Putin's political thought is this. Russia has a holy mission, and the West, America and Europe, are decidedly against it. It is an existential threat. This is an irreconcilable difference between America and Russia. And as General James Mattis has fondly noted, when you have irreconcilable differences between two major powers, that's inevitably going to gear up for a fight. So the question is, what does Vladimir Putin believe his role is? That's where we get to Lev Gumilov. Lev Gumilov, if there's any literature individuals in here who study literature, he's the son of Anna Akhmatova. He is the person that she is lamenting the loss of in her poem Requiem. After he escaped from the Soviet Gulag, he constructed a theory of ethnic ascendance. He asked the question, what is it that makes ethnicities into empires? And what he concluded is what it takes is a great leader to arise from the masses that's passionate and has the ability and the drive for sheer dominance. So how do we synthesize all this information? We can synthesize it most helpfully like this. God gave Russia a holy mission, which is to save Christendom. Nikolai Berdyaev envisioned what that destination looks like, a world of Russian unity and liberated from humanism. Ivan Ilyin outlined the threat, which is the West and America. Lev Gumilov made the map of how to get there. You need ethnic domination because of a strong man. The strong man needs to arise. And Stolypin is the model of that Russian strong man who's willing to do anything to preserve Russian culture, even if it means brutalizing his own civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, it is more than plausible that Vladimir Putin believes he is that strong man for this new epoch in Russian history. So the question then becomes, if Russia has this perspective, what happened the last time it had this perspective? And the answer is it went for Constantinople. This is Nicholas II, the last monarch of the Russian Empire. And in the tail end of World War I, one of the things he demanded from the other powers was the acquisition of this territory. These are the borders that he drew in 1914. This is what they wanted after World War I. The only reason they didn't get it is because the conference to finalize that holding was in November of 1917, which is when the Communist Revolution happened. The Communists swept in, killed the Tsar, killed his entire family, and just to prove how evil they were, they killed his dogs too. So it is proof positive that this episode of history has been seen before. When Russia was on the verge of getting everything it wanted from fulfilling its holy mission, communism swept in and destroyed it. That is what the Russian nationalist believes about this taking history. So then the question becomes, so is there something Russia has to gain from this territory? And the answer is absolutely yes. First off, this would make Russia a Mediterranean naval power. By controlling Constantinople and the Turkish Straits, they control the only vein of water between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. This allows them to project their naval power into the Mediterranean, where they can combat the United States and Europe. Additionally, this would likely break NATO. NATO is our most important military alliance, and it relies on trust. Every country in NATO needs to believe that if they are attacked, another country will support them. The problem is that Turkey and the rest of Europe, and Turkey's part of NATO, they are already suffering from an ideological split, which is Turkey's becoming more authoritarian and Islamic, and Europe is becoming more nationalist. That is a fissure in our alliance network that Russia would be able to exploit by attacking Turkey, because here's the golden question. If Russia attacks Turkey, who in Europe is willing to risk a nuclear war with Russia to defend them? And that's how you break that alliance network. Then there's the economic advantage. A fifth of the world's wheat trade flows through the Constantinople and the Turkish Straits. This means that Russia would be able to control the economies that are reliant on the Black Sea and force those countries to play ball with Russia if they want to have a healthy economy. Additionally, the religious aspect. This would likely cause a religious resurgence in Russia by opening the Hagia Sophia, the cathedral at the heart of Eastern Christendom. This would help rebuild an Eastern European power bloc, like what the Soviet Union had, but it would keep it together because Eastern Europe is very, very Christian. They're not communists, they're very Christian. And so this would help rebuild a Russian-based power bloc in Eastern Europe, and that's something that we are currently missing. This would also solve the demographic crisis by getting Russians to return to church. So then the question becomes, has Vladimir Putin left us any hints? And the answer is absolutely yes. In his war against Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014. So Area C, which is Abkhazia, is the first piece of territory that he sliced off of Georgia in 2008. That is very close to Supsa, which is a main economic hub that carries the oil from the Caspian Sea to the Black Sea for trade. Additionally, it's by the port of Batumi, which is a major naval target. Russia's annexation of Abkhazia has situated him for a conquest towards Turkey on the eastern front. D is South Ossetia, which allows him to be in close proximity to the Georgian capital to bring it to heel quickly. So what Russia's doing in 2008 is gearing up for an Eastern Front war against Turkey, because if Russia did engage Turkey, it would need two fronts. Now the next place is Crimean Peninsula, which is Area E. Russia, and it's pretty clear among American scholars what Russia's done. They've taken over the port of Sevastopol, and they're building up their naval forces. So, and in Section F, which is the Donbass region, that's where the ongoing fighting in Ukraine is still happening. And what Russia is doing is absorbing all of Ukraine's defense contractors and building up more lethal weapons, more ballistic missiles, more tank armor, and more armored personnel carriers. What Russia's doing is opening up a new front against Turkey. They're building the naval capacity to engage Constantinople, and they are modernizing in the Black Sea. These are clear warning signs that have been missed by American scholars because they just believe that this is just an ideological conquest of former Soviet territory. And that's all it is. We have missed the fact that Putin is gearing up for another conquest, and if we miss it, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So that's what the world will likely look like after Vladimir Putin does this. So then the implications. The first implication is rather troubling, which is that the Soviet Union is gone. We need to readjust our thinking to re-engage what it means to fight a Christian empire like Russia, and we have to engage our strategy accordingly. Additionally, Constantinople is an increasingly valuable target, but is increasingly vulnerable, meaning we should do something to make it less vulnerable. Additionally, the seizure of Constantinople and the Turkish Straits will turn Russia into a more formidable power that will be more difficult to dislodge when that inevitable fight comes. Additionally, history is preparing to repeat itself. We've seen what Russia has done before with this political calculus. And if we don't readjust our thinking, we're going to end up on the losing side, and America could lose its superpower status. So with that, I'd like to take your questions if you have any. And I would like to note that the nature of this paper is necessarily interdisciplinary because it involves a lot of art history and heraldry, military studies, obviously, even poetry and literature. So if anybody of a particular discipline is interested, go for it. Yes, ma'am.
So I think that this is an amazing research project. So I'm just kind of wondering, how would Russia's support of Assad factor into that maybe? Because
Absolutely.
Syria and Turkey share a border. Would that support your thesis because they're, going against like two fronts or something like that?
Absolutely. So in Syria, Russia has amassed about 6,000 troops, and in the Caucasus region, in Georgia and Armenia, they have about 13,000. So what Russia's been doing is encircling the eastern half of Turkey. So they're clearly building up a military presence, and their vested interest in Assad is most likely to build support on the southern front of Turkey to encircle it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see any difficulties arising later on using this Christian foundation to rebuild the Russian Empire when you have a regime that is not particularly Christian nor have Christian ends in mind?
Is the regime you're speaking about Russia?
Yeah.
Gotcha. So this is one of the popular theses about Russia, which is that it's just a rehashing of the old Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union, the Russian Orthodox Church became much more important. Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin have worked directly with the Orthodox Church in order to restore things like social morality. That's what they're trying to do. So because we are in the Soviet mindset, we miss it when Russia does very religious things. Like for instance, one of the things that Vladimir Putin has done is he has launched cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns against the Patriarch of Constantinople. Just for point of reference, the Patriarch is like the head of the national church. The Patriarch of Constantinople is right now the most powerful person in Eastern Christendom. A campaign to delegitimize him has been seen by a lot of people as an indication that Vladimir Putin is trying to get the Russian Orthodox Church to have more ecclesiastical power in Eastern Europe, which would certainly help his grand strategy of creating this old notion that the Byzantine Empire is back for another run and it's here to liberate Eastern Europe from the forces of paganism and Islam. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see some of the economic movements Russia's making, say, for instance, in Romania, buying up areas around the Black Sea, the training system there, as part of this plan?
Yeah, in military parlance, we call that A2AD, anti-access denial and anti-area denial. And what that means is that in Romania, actually let's zoom in a little bit on Romania. When it comes to Romania, the area that you're speaking of, on those coastal areas, what Russia's essentially doing is trying to lock down control of each side of the Black Sea because they want this to be their lake. They want to be entirely undefeated here. In Romania, particularly in this area, we have a lot of NATO anti-ship and radar installations. And so if Russia can sort of move in there with sticky power, and sticky power is kind of a term that we use in international relations to describe like investments into an area, so they become reliant. So when Russia increases investment, it makes them reliant, so that, for instance, if they buy a plot of land and the government wants to come in and install weapon systems there, the local the property owners will be like, well, we've already got this investment that we're living off of, so we don't want to introduce new weapon systems here. So he's locking down control for Romania as well. Yes, sir.
So Hagia Sophia has been a mosque for quite some time now. Do you perceive, or does Putin perceive any threat from the international Islamic community?
Absolutely. This is actually one of the things I think is the clincher as to why Vladimir Putin would do this. If Vladimir Putin believes that he is the reincarnation of the old Byzantine Empire, the old Byzantine Empire benefited from the fact that it was the shield against Islam. The old Byzantine Empire existed in Eastern Europe, and Western Europe survived largely because the Byzantine Empire defended them from the Persians and the Umayyads and the other Islamic empires. If Russia is able to stir up Turkey in a way where Turkey has an even more vicious upsurge in Islamic fundamentalism, and that threatens Europe, Western Europe, might be finding themselves in a situation where they want another Byzantine shield. This is how Russia moves the geographical clock to where it wants it. They might want Russia to be here as a shield, as a Christian empire. Yes?
Another question, sorry. Do you think America could benefit from having a new Byzantine shield?
That is a big question, and in the course of my research, I keep asking myself that. Is this a terrible thing for America? And the answer is absolutely yes when I think about it, because America, our values of liberal democracy, if we are truly dedicated to those values, are entirely incompatible with Russia's view of how the world should work. And the reason is because Ivan Ilyin and a lot of these Russian philosophers believe that Russia's goal in the world, they take 1 Corinthians chapter 7 to mean that God gave certain ethnic groups gifts, not people gifts, ethnic groups gifts. And so the Slavs have their gifts, the French have their gifts, and Russia's job is to protect all of those different people and make sure they can pursue their own creativity, but Russia's the empire. And so they view Western liberalism, they view our system of government as blasphemous, because what we try to do is blend all the ethnicities together and create a melting pot. That, from Russia's perspective, is a destruction of God's creation. And as former Secretary of Defense General Mattis has noted, when you have these irreconcilable differences of how the world should work, that leads to inevitable power struggles. So unless Russia abandons its plans, which it hasn't for like 1,000 years with the quick interruption of the Soviet Union, and unless America abandons our principles, we're looking at a fight. Yes, sir.
Given the tenuous relations the United States has internationally with President Erdogan in Turkey right now, what would you say would be the actual proactive responses that we as the U.S. military can or should be taking inside of the area?
So this is going to lead to one of the most painful questions that this thesis presents, which is what are we going to do with Turkey? Turkey has been increasingly Islamic and increasingly authoritarian ever since the 1970s. And that impulse of the old Ottoman Empire that everybody's nostalgic about is coming back. There's not a lot we can do to change that unless we work through the CIA. And which, that has some moral implications certainly. But as far as shifting Turkey's trajectory, it's probably a pipe dream. And so what we might need to consider is booting Turkey out of NATO. And the reason for this is because Turkey is a massive liability. And it goes back to the mutual trust in the alliance. Nobody wants to defend Turkey. They're not part of Europe from their European perspective. So if we boot Turkey out of NATO, it might give Russia this territory. But we will have saved the integrity of the rest of the alliance network. And military historian Barbara Truckman has explicitly said, when you have major military follies in history, it's because people just continued in error and didn't stop. So we might have to evaluate our error here in letting Turkey into NATO at all.
Another minute.
Yes, sir. You said that as far as the Americans go, the think tanks and the diplomats and politicians have been blind to this. What about the other neighboring countries in Europe?
The other neighboring
countries.
countries.
What are their thoughts on this?
So the first one that comes to mind is Belarus. So Belarus is not on this map, I don't think. It's up here somewhere. Belarus is an Eastern European country, former Soviet Union country, that is very much happy with the trajectory of Russia. They believe that they are destined to be one with Russia. So Belarus is already picking up on that resurgence in Christian thought, and that's why the Eastern Orthodox community in Belarus is coming back with such fire, because they see this trend. Additionally, in Bulgaria is a little bit ambivalent about it. They have mixed feelings because on one hand they want to benefit from the NATO power bloc, and it's a big change to shift to a pro-Russia power bloc, and so they're not entirely sure what they're going to do, but there's a very, very heavy impulse in Bulgaria to reestablish what they used to have, which is the Byzantine Empire. In Greece, just to finish it off, in Greece has suffered so much under the Turks that they are in mortal enmity. They have a mortal enmity against one another. Crete is actually still split, or maybe it's Cyprus. Cyprus is still split in half because there's a demilitarized zone between which one belongs to Turkey and which one belongs to Greece, because they still have a territorial dispute over that. One of the things Russia could do easily is take that piece of territory and say, hey, Greece, you want to be on our side? Well, we'll give you your land back with that old Byzantine jewel so that you can have your old capital back. And so that's one of the ways Russia can win soft power in that way as well.